The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the streets of colonial America with streaks of soft gold. Most townspeople were still waking, stretching beneath rough wool blankets. But for one man, the day had already begun. The town crier. Clad in a heavy coat, breeches, and a tricorn hat. The town crier was the beating heart of colonial communication. There were no newspapers for the common folk, no radios to deliver breaking news. He was the voice of the town. Clutching a brass handbell, he strode down the cobblestone streets, his boots clicking against the stones. The sound of the bell echoed sharply through the morning air. "Hear ye! Hear ye!" He shouted, his voice carrying over the rooftops. People peeked from their windows, women wiping flour from their aprons. Children pausing their causes. He would announce everything: market prices, lost items, political news, even public punishments. Sometimes he had to repeat the same message in several parts of town, walking for hours until his throat burned. The job might sound simple, but it demanded a loud, trained voice, incredible stamina, and the ability to stay calm even when crowds jeered or questioned him. The town crier also had to be trustworthy. He delivered legal proclamations straight from the governor or local officials. Mistakes could lead to fines, shame, or even losing his job entirely. And yet, the work carried status and respect. Many town criers earned steady pay, a rarity in colonial America. People recognized their faces, nodded to them in the market, and occasionally tipped them with coins or bread. As the sun climbed higher, the town crier continued, his voice hoarse. As the sun climbed higher, and kitchens filled with the smell of baking bread, another strange colonial profession began its work. The rat catcher. In a world where food was stored in wooden barrels and homes were built with gaps wide enough for rodents to sneak through, rats were more than a nuisance. They were a threat to survival. They chewed through grain sacks, spoiled precious stores, and spread diseases no one fully understood. Enter the rat catcher, a man armed with traps, poisons, and a peculiar set of skills. Many rat catchers were poor laborers who learned through experience rather than training. They carried wooden cages, metal traps, and sometimes even trained dogs or ferrets to hunt the pests. The rat catcher's day began in dark cellars and dusty kitchens, crouching low with only a dim lantern for light. The smell was often unbearable, as rats left droppings in the corners where food was stored. But this was his daily routine, crawling into filth to protect families from infestation. Some rat catchers claimed to have secret remedies, smearing pungent herbs or strange pasties around door frames to ward off rodents. Others were more practical, relying on patience and well-placed bait. Despite the unpleasantness, the job could pay surprisingly well. Wealthier households, terrified of losing their stored grain, were willing to pay generously for a man who could rid them of the plague of rats. But the work was dangerous. Rat bites were common, and infections often followed. By late afternoon, a rat catcher might return to the town square, proudly displaying the lifeless rodents in his traps as proof of his work. People recoiled at the sight, but they paid him gladly, thankful their bread and grain would be safe for another night. Though looked down upon socially, the rat catcher played a vital role in keeping colonial towns healthy and fed, his work as essential as any farmer or blacksmith. When darkness fell over the quiet colonial streets, a different kind of worker stepped into action, the night soil man, His job was not just strange, it was disgusting, yet absolutely essential to the health of the entire town. Colonial homes and taverns used outhouses, also known as privies, which quickly filled with human waste. If left unattended, they would overflow, spreading disease and unbearable stench. The solution? A man willing to do the filthiest work imaginable, clad in rough clothes that reeked permanently of his trade. The night soil man worked after dark to avoid prying eyes and to spare townsfolk the smell. Armed with wooden buckets, long-handled scoops, and sometimes a small cart, he would carefully scoop waste from outhouses and transfer it into barrels. The job was back-breaking and dangerous. Privies often teetered on muddy ground, and accidents happened. Men slipped, buckets tipped, and the night could turn into a nightmare beyond the physical risk. Exposure to waste carried sickness, and few night soil men lived long, healthy lives. Yet, despite the dangers and social shame, the job paid surprisingly well. Towns and wealthy households were desperate for someone to do this necessary task. Night soil men earned far more than many skilled laborers, though they were often shunned in public. Under the cover of moonlight, these men hauled their foul-smelling cargo outside the town limits, dumping it in designated pits or selling it to farmers as fertilizer. By dawn, they disappeared, leaving streets clean and privies empty, ready for another day of colonial life. Unseen, uncelebrated, yet vital, the night soil man kept the town livable, one bucket at a time. Colonial homes and taverns often burned dozens of candles every evening, but candles were not just for light. They were a precious commodity. Wax was expensive, and careless burning could waste hours of light. Enter the candle snuffer. This was often a household servant or a hired helper whose job was simple but important. Trim candle wicks and snuff out flames properly to make them last longer. They used a small metal tool with skizzer-like blades to trim the blackened wicks, preventing smoking and uneven burning. In wealthy households, candle snuffers were treated with respect. Wasting candles was almost a crime, when each one took hours to make by hand. Some even carried beautifully decorated snuffing tools, a sign of status in fine homes. The chimney sweeps if the candle snuffer was a quiet, indoor worker. The chimney sweep was the opposite. Grimy, loud, and often young boys or thin men hired to crawl into the tight, soot-filled chimneys. Colonial fireplaces burned constantly, and if chimneys weren't cleaned, soot buildup could spark deadly house fires. Sweeps would climb up narrow brick shafts, scraping soot and ash with stiff brushes, often emerging blackened from head to toe. The work was filthy and dangerous. Many sweeps choked on soot, suffered burns, or even got stuck inside chimneys. Yet, they were always in demand, especially during the colder months when fires burned day and night. By the end of the day, a chimney sweep might earn enough for a hot meal and a few coins, but they were rarely admired, just necessary shadows in the background of colonial life. If you had a toothache in colonial America, you didn't visit a dentist, you went to the barber. Barbers in the 1700s were far more than just haircutters. Known as barber surgeons, they cut hair, shaved beards, stitched wounds, set broken bones, and, most famously, pulled aching teeth. The traveling tooth pullers, some barbers didn't even own shops. They were traveling tooth pullers, wandering from town to town with a wooden box of crude tools. Their arrival was often announced by word of mouth or by the barber himself shouting in the streets, "Teeth pulled, hair cut, wounds stitched." People lined up, desperate for relief, even though the experience was brutally painful. There were no painkillers, no numbing powders, just strong hands and iron pliers. Tooth pullers worked quickly, sometimes yanking a tooth in seconds, but the screams could be heard down the street. Still, their service was cheap and far easier to find than an expensive doctor. The barbers. Dual role. In a tan shop, the barber's striped pole became a familiar sight. The red and white colors symbolized blood and bandages, a reminder of his dual trade. Many barbers displayed teeth they had pulled, strung together like trophies, to prove their skill. Though the work was gruesome, it paid well. Barbers were trusted members of the community, often hearing the latest gossip while trimming hair or easing the villagers suffering with their pliers. But accidents were common. Teeth broke, infections spread, and sometimes pulling the wrong tooth left patients worse off than before. Yet for most colonists, the barber was their only hope for medical care. Colonial life was hard, and moments of joy were rare. But every now and then, the sound of laughter echoed through the streets, thanks to traveling entertainers and puppet show masters. The traveling entertainers, these entertainers wandered from town to town with little more than a fiddle, juggling balls, or a trained animal. They performed in taverns, marketplaces, and sometimes even private homes of wealthy families. Jugglers tossed knives, fire-eaters amazed crowds with daring tricks, and fiddlers played lively tunes that set feet tapping on wooden floors. For many colonists, these shows were the only escape from long days of labor. Payment was simple: a few coins, a mug of cider, or sometimes just a hot meal. Entertainers often slept in barns or common rooms, relying on the kindness of strangers. The puppet show masters, perhaps the most beloved form of entertainment, was the puppet show. Puppet masters carried small wooden stages and colorful cloth puppets, performing stories of heroic soldiers, mischievous animals, or even comical versions of local gossip. Children sat wide-eyed on the dusty ground, while adults chuckled quietly in the back. Some puppet shows had moral lessons, teaching kindness and honesty, while others were pure fun, filled with slapstick humor. Though respected by children, entertainers were often seen as outsiders by strict colonists, especially in Puritan communities where frivolity was frowned upon. Still, their presence brought much-needed laughter to a world filled with toil and hardship. By the end of the night, as lanterns flickered low, an entertainer packed up his tools, waved to his small audience, and disappeared down the road, a brief spark of happiness fading into the quiet colonial night. In colonial towns, if you were sick or in pain, you didn't visit a modern pharmacy. You went to the apothecary. But beyond selling herbs and powders, apothecaries often dealt with the strangest requests and bizarre beliefs of their time. The colonial apothecary shop, the shop smelled of dried herbs, spices, and strong medicinal brews. Spices and strong medicinal brews. Wooden shelves were lined with glass jars filled with mysterious powders, ground roots, and colorful liquids. Mortar and pestle clinked as the apothecary ground ingredients into fine mixtures. Customers came with every imaginable complaint, aching joints, fevers, coughs, or even curses they believed needed breaking. The apothecary listened patiently, scribbling notes before preparing a remedy. Strange colonial cures, some remedies worked, but others were based more on superstition than science. Dried toad powder was believed to cure toothaches. Crushed pearls, mixed with vinegar, were recommended for stomach pains. Extensive, but fashionable. Snake skin tea was thought to ward off fevers, and if that didn't work, many apothecaries recommended bloodletting or purging, believing sickness came from bad humors in the body. The oddest requests, not all requests were medical. Some customers asked for love potions, charms, or powders to bring good fortune. Though officially frowned upon, some apothecaries quietly sold these magical remedies to make extra money. The apothecary's life was a balance between real medicine, superstition, and keeping customers happy, no matter how strange their demands were. At night, the shop glowed softly by candlelight, the apothecary still grinding herbs, preparing tiny packets of hope for the town. As the sun dipped below the horizon and lanterns flickered to life, the many strange workers of colonial America finished their long days. The town crier hung up his bell, his voice hoarse from shouting news to every street. The rat catcher, hands scratched and bitten, cleaned his traps, hoping his work would keep families safe for another night. Somewhere in the darkness, the night soil man trudged through the silent streets, carrying his buckets to the edge of town. In warm homes, candles burned low, thanks to the careful work of candle snuffers, while chimneys, cleaned by tired sweeps, glowed safely with gentle firelight. Barbers finished their final haircuts, their tables scattered with combs, scissors, and a stray tooth or two. In town squares, entertainers and puppet masters packed their instruments and stages, leaving behind laughter and smiling children. And in a quiet corner of a shop, the apothecary mixed his last potion for the night, grinding herbs and whispering reassurances to a worried mother. Life in colonial America was not easy. Most of these workers lived thankless, difficult lives, often risking their health for just a few coins. Yet, each played a vital role in keeping their communities alive, safe, and even entertained. When we think of history, we often imagine powerful governors, wealthy merchants, and heroic soldiers. But the real heartbeat of colonial life belonged to these ordinary people, workers who, through their strange and often unpleasant jobs, held the towns together one day at a time. As night settled, the town grew quiet, its people asleep under the faint glow of a few remaining candles, ready to rise again at dawn and begin another day in the world of strange colonial jobs.